A student came to his Zen master and said, "I've been practicing stillness. I no longer react to things. I let everything pass without responding." The master observed him for several days. The student sat quietly while others worked. He watched conflicts arise and said nothing. He let opportunities pass without moving. Finally, the master approached him. "You're not still," he said. "You're stuck." The student was confused. "But I'm calm. I'm not reacting." The master shook his head. "Calm acts when action is needed. What you're doing is avoidance. You're calling your fear peace." Calm and passivity look similar from the outside. Both involve not reacting immediately. Both appear composed, measured, unhurried. But internally, they're completely different. One comes from clarity and presence. The other comes from fear, inertia, or the avoidance of discomfort. And the difference between them determines whether you're living consciously or simply drifting. Calm is a state of inner stillness that doesn't collapse under pressure. It's the ability to remain centered, clear-headed, and responsive even in difficult circumstances. When you're calm, you're not controlled by emotion, but you're also not disconnected from reality. You see what's happening, you feel what needs to be felt, and from that grounded place, you act skillfully, intentionally, without unnecessary force or reactivity. Passivity, on the other hand, is withdrawal. It's the refusal to engage, often masked as detachment or acceptance. It looks like letting things happen, but underneath, it's driven by fear of conflict, fear of failure, fear of being uncomfortable. Passivity doesn't respond because it's too afraid to act, too tired to try, or too attached to comfort to risk anything. It calls itself calm, but it's actually frozen. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action, is frequently misunderstood as doing nothing. But Wu Wei is not passivity. It's acting in harmony with the flow of things, without forcing, without striving against reality. It's the difference between a river flowing around a rock and a river stopping because the rock is there. The river doesn't force, but it doesn't stop either. It responds, it adapts, it moves. Calm operates the same way. It doesn't force outcomes, it doesn't react impulsively, but it also doesn't refuse to act when action is necessary. Calm sees clearly and responds appropriately. It knows when to speak and when to be silent, when to intervene and when to step back, when to push and when to yield. This discernment requires presence, not passivity. Passivity, by contrast, has no discernment. It treats every situation the same. Don't engage, don't respond, don't move. It mistakes inaction for wisdom. It confuses avoiding responsibility with being spiritual. And over time, passivity leads to stagnation. Nothing changes, nothing grows. You're not at peace, you're just numb. The Buddhist teaching distinguishes between upekkha, equanimity, and indifference. Equanimity is balanced awareness. It's the ability to remain steady in the face of pleasure and pain, praise and blame, gain and loss. But equanimity is not cold. It's not disconnected. It still cares. It still responds. It just doesn't lose itself in reactivity. Indifference, on the other hand, doesn't care at all. It's apathy dressed up as detachment. And apathy is not freedom, it's avoidance. So how do you know the difference in yourself? How do you know whether you're being calm or just passive? Ask yourself, am I still because I'm clear or because I'm afraid? Am I not acting because action isn't needed or because I don't want to deal with the discomfort? Am I responding from presence or am I avoiding from fear? The answers will tell you. Calm feels grounded. It feels alive. Even in stillness, there's alertness, readiness, awareness. You're not reacting, but you're fully present. You could act if needed. You're choosing not to. Consciously, passivity feels heavy. It feels numb, stuck, resigned. There's no aliveness in it. You're not choosing stillness. You're defaulting to it because everything else feels too hard. In Zen practice, this distinction is crucial. The student sits in meditation, still and silent, but that stillness is not passive. It's intensely active internally, observing breath, noticing thought, returning to presence again and again. The body is still, but the mind is engaged. This is calm. But if the student sits simply to avoid facing their life, to escape responsibility, to numb out, that's not practice, that's hiding. The same applies outside meditation. You can remain calm in a conflict without being passive. You can listen without reacting, assess without judgment, and then respond clearly when the moment calls for it. That's skillful action rooted in calm. But if you stay silent because you're afraid to speak, if you let harm continue because you don't want to be uncomfortable, if you avoid taking a stand because it's easier to do nothing, that's passivity. And passivity enables what it refuses to confront. Lao Tzu writes, "The sage acts without acting." This is the essence of Wu Wei. The sage doesn't force, but the sage also doesn't refuse. Action arises naturally, appropriately, from a deep understanding of the situation. There's no strain, no ego, no attachment to outcome. But there's also no cowardice, no laziness, no hiding behind spiritual concepts. So the practice is to cultivate calm, real calm, rooted in awareness and presence, while refusing to let it become an excuse for passivity. You remain still when stillness serves. You act when action serves. And you know the difference because you're awake enough to discern which is which. This requires honesty. It requires looking at your motivations without justification. It requires asking whether your stillness is clarity or avoidance. And when it's avoidance, it requires the courage to move, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you're not sure, even if it risks failure, because calm without action when action is needed is just fear wearing a spiritual mask. The student sat with the master's words. He realized he'd been confusing peace with paralysis. The next day, when the garden needed tending, he stood and worked, still calm, but no longer stuck. If you choose to follow this channel, it truly helps me keep creating and improving these reflections. And if not, that's completely okay. I'm grateful you spent this time here. I'll see you tomorrow in the next episode. Until then, I wish you a calm and peaceful day.